Jon Bonne, San Francisco Chronicle wine editor.
And John, what are we doing here today? We're tasting a bunch of wine.
We are wrapping up the 2012 Chronicle wine tasting in strangely sunny Cloverdale for January.
How long have you been with the Chronicle?
A little over 5 years now.
Okay, and you were actually up in the Northwest prior to.
I was.
You kind of went back east and came back to the West Coast.
Yeah, back in New York for about a blink of an eye. In Seattle for 6 years. So, and kind of a good 6 years to watch Washington really grow up.
And from your perspective, you cover primarily California, but you guys really do cover the West Coast pretty heavily. So, what's your perspective on Northwest wines compared with the California wines you see more often?
It's interesting. I mean, there's definitely been a mainstreaming, both in Washington and in Oregon. And in Washington, there was a couple years where I think it was like after Quilceda Creek got its first 100 that the wines kind of went a little far. They went down the California road of getting a little sweet, a little alcoholic, a little over the top. And then the past couple of vintages, they've really come back and sort of found their form again. And they really are, they're showing the aromatics that I always think of when I think of Yakima Valley or Walla Walla. And they're kind of, they're back in form. The tannic structures seem right. The white wines are kind of coming and going. There's a few sort of new, beautiful Rieslings, but Chardonnay seems to be kind of off in the wilderness. But that's true everywhere.
Right.
In Oregon, it's hard because the 08s were so good in Oregon that coming off of the 09s, which were good but were ripe, and it's going to be a good vintage for them to just catch up, make some new converts, get some of the new names out there and get people familiar. So it's strong, but it's the industry is much more mature now than it was a decade ago.
Right, and Riesling, I suspect you don't see a whole lot. On the West Coast, there's really just Washington. There's a little bit of California, a little bit of Oregon, but
yeah, it's interesting. California Riesling has kind of fallen off the map entirely, except as a supermarket brand. It's like everyone's down in Monterey trying to chase Saint Michel for whatever reason, and probably not in a wise way, because you're never going to underprice them, and you're never going to make a more sort of technically sound Riesling. You still see that it sort of owns most of the category. There's a couple people who are trying to do more serious wines here, but you do see something like Beast from Beauty, and some of the better Pacific Rim stuff, and there's just a bunch of folks who are really trying to make more serious Rieslings that is great to see, because it's still one of these things that Washington can kind of own.
Right. How's California weathering this economy? I mean, you guys kind of have it as tough as anybody in the country.
Yeah, it's interesting. The wine industry here is still sort of determined to grow, even with the economy, and it's not an industry that starts and stops easily. It's doing okay. I think the tough thing is everyone still wants to make kind of expensive wine here, and that's just there's some market for very expensive wine, but there's this limited amount you can make, and there's a big market for inexpensive wine, but people have sort of given up that sort of affordable everyday realm because they all want to make fancier wines. And I keep waiting. I keep writing that that this is the niche that California needs to work on. And one of these days, I'm hoping people will kind of take up the challenge.
One of the things you wrote on, I think it was last year, that really picked up a lot of controversy was adding alcohol to your reviews.
Absolutely.
And tell us about the feedback on that.
Well, most people are really happy. There's a few winemakers who aren't loving it, and who sort of say, well, it doesn't really matter, and don't know why you're doing it, and you're just kind of misguiding people. And but on balance, it's interesting for all of the people who are just trying to say, well, alcohol doesn't really matter. And of course, you only say that when you're making wine that is high enough in alcohol that it's disturbing to some people. Consumers do pay attention to it, for better or worse, and it's not a great indicator, but it's something people care about, and honestly, it's something that is enough of an issue that it's worth putting out there as a data point. And if at some point it stops being an issue, then we can revisit it. But we've never gotten a really legitimate reason why we should just stop.
And you also sent some bottles to be tested to see how they compared with what was listed on the label. And it was kind of some, maybe not surprising results, but probably was to the consumer.
Somewhat, yeah. I mean, there's this weird legal loophole that lets you be kind of, notably off in your alcohol percentage on the label, and it's interesting because it kind of split between the people who just didn't know that they were off. They were using kind of an old test protocol, or there were just some inconsistencies, and then the people who just kind of knew they were off, but they were willing to take advantage of the loophole. They didn't want to kind of go through the bureaucracy of doing maybe some extra state paperwork or Canadian paperwork or whatever it was to to reprint labels, or they just didn't want to reprint at all. And the folks who were off were sort of, I don't know that they were happy to know, but they at least were willing to go back and look at their protocols, including one winery where the assistant winemaker actually sells the equipment that we used to do the testing. And the folks who just are kind of defiant about it, well, it's, if they think they can get away with it and people don't care and they keep selling their wine, then they'll keep doing it. And if they keep shedding more light, we keep shedding more light, then maybe they'll change. I'm still planning to do another round of tests this year at some point, and so we'll see. And we'll kind of choose a slightly different set of wines and see what happens.
When people think California wine, they first think Napa, then they think Sonoma. What else should they be thinking about? What's kind of the hot up-and-comer that you wish people would pay more attention to?
I think those are actually good places. I think they should be really paying attention to where in Sonoma, as you get farther out to the marginal areas on the coast, that really is sort of the really interesting place here where there's great wine being made. They should be looking up in the Sierra foothills. There, in the past 2 or 3 years, really has been an extraordinary set of wines coming down out of there. A lot of Rhone-based varieties, a lot of Grenache Blanc, Vermentino. It's just extraordinary wine. They should be looking back at Santa Rita Hills, but not the sort of traditional Santa Rita Hills wines. There's folks who are working, again, in kind of the farther western, more marginal areas and producing very nuanced, very lively wines. And so there's a bunch of places that are kind of coming back online and getting attention again, really as the winemaking catches up with the terroir.
All right. Well, Jon, thanks for your time.
Hey, my pleasure.